carry me back to old Virginia. Carry me back to old Virginia. There's where the cotton...
The James River plantations are famous for many reasons. Arguably, they're most famous for their ghost stories. Undoubtedly, the most well-known of these paranormal tales comes from the James River's oldest plantation, Shirley. The story centers upon a rather fussy painting of one Aunt Pratt. And if you visit the site, you'll be treated to Aunt Pratt's odd behavior in a captivating, humorous manner, much akin to L.B. Taylor's essay, The Haunted Portrait, from his book, The Ghosts of Virginia's Tidewater. It is unquestionably one of the most magnificent original colonial mansions in the United States. Architectural historians believe that parts of its impressive design were inspired by the governor's palace in Williamsburg. The site on which the great house sits is steeped in early Virginia history and tradition. It was, in fact, built in 1613, just 6 years after the first settlers landed at nearby Jamestown, and a full 7 years before the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth Rock. This is Shirley Plantation, located at a point overlooking a scenic bend in the James River about halfway between Williamsburg and Richmond. It was originally owned by Sir Thomas West, the first royal governor of the colony of Virginia. He named it in honor of his wife's father, Sir Thomas Shirley of Whitsun, England. The estate later gained eminence as the home of Colonel Edward Hill, who held many high offices in the colony through the mid-17th century. The property has been in the Hill and Carter families for more than 300 years. The present house was begun in 1723 by the third Edward Hill. It took nearly 50 years to complete the construction and was done, as one author described it, quote, with a lavish disregard for cost seldom displayed in the building of great mansions. This handsome brick house stands 3 stories, with rows of dormer windows projecting from the roof on all sides. It has huge twin chimneys, which flank a large carved pineapple, the symbol of colonial hospitality. 2 splendid 2-story porticos, each with 4 white pillars, set off the front of the building with stylish grace. Inside, 18th century artisans fashioned superb paneling and delicate carvings. A major design feature is an elegant carved walnut staircase that rises for 3 stories without visible support, the only one of its kind in America. The entire house is filled with exquisite furnishings, crested silver, and interesting memorabilia assembled from the many generations of the families who have lived here. Shirley was a well-known center of hospitality a century before and during the Revolutionary War. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were guests, as were numerous other prominent Virginians. One of the most charming anecdotes that took place in the house occurred late in the 18th century when a young and beautiful Anne Hill Carter was carrying a punch bowl across the dining room and it began to slip from her fingers. She was rescued by a dashing young military officer, Light Horse Harry Lee. Not long afterward, they were married at Shirley. Their son became one of the most famous of all Virginians, Robert E. Lee. Perhaps the most intriguing legend at the plantation revolves around the ghost of a former resident and family member, a woman known as Aunt Pratt. She reportedly was a sister of Edward Hill and was born late in the 17th century. Little is known of her, but it is said that there always was a certain air of mystery about the woman. One of the things Shirley is noted for is its fine collection of family portraits. Aunt Pratt's picture occupied a prominent place in a downstairs bedroom for a number of years after her death. Then, in the 1960s, as a new generation of the family took over occupancy and decided to redecorate, her portrait was taken down and banished to the obscurity of the attic. Aunt Pratt, or rather her spirit, did not take kindly to this. In fact, she made what household members described as a mighty disturbance. This usually took the form of the sound of a woman crying and rocking in the attic late at night. A number of guests, as well as the Hills and Carters, told of hearing the incessant rocking on certain nights. Yet, when they summoned the courage to check the attic, all was still and quiet. Nothing was amiss. Eventually, the restlessness of her spirit proved to be too much for the residents, and they prudently brought the portrait back down and hung it in its rightful place. Once this was done, the strange sounds were never heard again. This, however, did not end Aunt Pratt's troubles. In 1971, and this is documented, the Virginia State Travel Council scoured the Commonwealth in search of relics, antiques, and other items associated with psychic phenomena for a tourist promotion it was assembling in New York City. Council officials, having heard the story of Aunt Pratt's ghostly rocking, asked if they might borrow the portrait for the exhibit, and so she was created and shipped north. But no sooner had she been hung on a wall when she once again, quote, came to life, openly venting her displeasures at being so far away from home. According to credible witness accounts, the portrait was once observed swinging in its display case. Then one morning, workmen found the portrait lying on the floor several feet away from the case and, in their words, quote, heading toward the exit. As a security measure, officials had Aunt Pratt locked up in a closet when not on exhibit. One night, a maintenance crew became unnerved when they heard knocking and crying coming from the locked closet. No one was inside. The next morning, the portrait mysteriously had escaped from the closet and was lying on the floor outside. Psychic experts are in general agreement that spirits that manifest themselves in the manner Aunt Pratt did are actually ghosts of residents who believe, even though they are long dead and gone, that the house they lived in still belongs to them. This seems to be the most plausible explanation in Aunt Pratt's case. Subsequent events added credence to this theory. On its way back south from the New York showing, the portrait was taken to a shop in Richmond, Virginia, so that repairs could be made on the now battered frame. When it was picked up later, the shop owner said that ever since Aunt Pratt had been in his care, he heard bells ringing. This he deemed at best odd and at worst eerily haunting because, he added, there were no bells of any kind in his shop. The portrait was then restored once more to its proper place on a wall in the downstairs bedroom, and Aunt Pratt has not been heard from again, with one startling exception. A few years ago, the author was called by one of Shirley's historical interpreters. She said that she had been telling the story of Aunt Pratt to a group of tourists. One man who was standing in front of a large chest right beneath the portrait said, "That's the biggest bunch of baloney I ever heard." At that precise instant, the doors of the chest suddenly sprang open and banged him sharply on his backside. The interpreter said that the room emptied in 10 seconds. Thank you for your continued support of the Virginia History Podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast provider. Like us on Facebook, and visit the website at vahistorypodcast.com. Please share the program as well as rating the podcast on iTunes and offering any feedback that you may have. Also, consider contributing to the podcast's Patreon campaign, which would greatly help fund future research and episodes. There will be a link on the show notes page, or one can also find the link under the support tab on the website. Thank you to those who have provided me with valuable comments. They're greatly appreciated, and please keep them coming. And join me next time as we continue looking into Virginia's growth along the James River.
Do do ba do des be do do buzzing, buzzing.